I'm Lucky Craft Pro Kelly Jordan, and let's talk square bills, a little bit of the history about square bills. So probably a square bill is one of the first crankbaits there ever was, way back when, before I was ever born. You had like the Big O and a bunch of other baits like that were basically lure makers and designers trying to make a crankbait and tinkering with it. And this is before deep diving crankbaits ever came out. Pretty much you had the shallow divers, and a square bill pretty much was what a lot of them were back there. I mean, there are a bunch of examples of that. And then you had a long time and still to this day, the most famous and most valuable square bills are these balsa ones that were made in the 70s, maybe 80s, what have you. And then it kind of died away for a little bit until there was a Bassmaster Classic won by Takahiro Omori on a square bill. That's kind of when the square bill craze had maybe already kind of been, everything in the sport of fishing is, peaks and valleys and stuff. Stuff gets popular, goes out of popularity, comes back in. The square bill kind of started spiking in popularity. And then Lucky Craft came out with the 1.5. And that changed everything. That was the first, I guess, readily available, fish catching, dynamic, unbelievable action square bill was the Lucky Craft 1.5. That started the whole trend. All the ones you see out now are imitations or other people's renditions of whatever the square bill, but the Lucky Craft 1.5 started that whole deal. This was the original kind of craze of the new era of square bills. This is it right here. Often copied, never duplicated. This is it. If you want to use a square bill, go get you a Lucky Craft 1.5 and a 2.5 and a 3.5, and my favorite, the 5.5. If you can catch them on that, look out. You better have some big line on your rod, but that is where your hunt for the perfect square bill starts, right there. And let's talk fall square billing. Everybody likes square bills. Everybody loves to throw square bills. Square bills are one of the deadliest crankbaits on the market, and the Lucky Craft 1.5 is pretty much the standard in the square bills. In the fall, this thing really, really shines. It's good year round. You can always catch fish on a square bill. But in the fall, fish are chasing bait. They're moving into the creeks. They're getting shallow again from their summertime haunts, chasing bait, really active, really feeding heavy. That's when you can put a Lucky Craft 1.5 on and cover some water. And I'm talking from the back of the creek to a main lake, windy shoreline with rock, points, shallow, you name it, hitting wood, cranking down the side of docks, over the top of grass, outside grass line, pilings, you name it. Hard to go wrong with a 1.5 in the fall. Now this is a shad pattern. You remember shad is the predominant bait pretty much everywhere in the fall. I like a shad pattern. I also like a silent one a little bit more in the fall. This one is not the rattle one. This is the silent one. A little more natural, a little more burning through. And remember, it's that fast burning retrieve, hitting stuff occasionally, getting a deflection. But if you see fish actively chasing bait, or if you're in a creek just wanting to cover water and get a strike, it's hard to beat a Lucky Craft 1.5. Let's talk a little bit about fall cranking for bass. One of the things in the fall that is happening across the country is the fish are putting the feed bag on for the winter. Shad is the predominant bait fish. That's pretty much the name of the game in the fall. You want to be around the shad, you want to follow the shad, you want to find where the shad are, and the fish relate to shad a bunch. So when you're around those shad, a lot of times they're suspended, not relating to the bottom near as much. They can be main lake, they can be in creeks, they can be on points, they can be on humps, they can pretty much be everywhere. So the main thing is find the bait fish, figure out how to get your bait around those fish that are chasing the bait fish, and then have a bait that stays in the strike zone and entices a bite in the fall when the fish really are chasing bait. And it's a fast time of year, if that makes sense. Springtime, a lot of times in winter, is a more slower presentation. In the fall, a lot of times actually speeding up your fishing can help you get more bites, kind of get more of a reaction. They're used to chasing, they are hungry. Putting all those things in mind, one of my favorite fall crankbaits is a Lucky Craft 1.5 DD. What separates this from a bunch of other crankbaits? Well, it's the size. A lot of times in the fall, the bait fish are smaller size. They're not as big as they are, say, later in the winter or in the spring, all the way up to the shad spawn. Most of the shad you find in the fall were spawned during the shad spawn that previous spring, say in April or May. So they're typically small. 1.5 is a pretty good size. It's about 2 inches long. It's a great suspending fish bait because it doesn't float super fast. It just kind of goes along pretty good, and it'll rise, of course, like a crankbait does, but it kind of stays in the strike zone really well, a little bit longer. And one of the things it does too is it has a real tight action. It's not the big wobble that we look for other times of year when we're banging on the bottom. It's a good open water crankbait. It's got a tight wiggle, stays in the strike zone, gets a lot of open water strikes. It's great on suspended fish, and it imitates a shad perfectly.